Empty wallet, hungry alien girls, father's impossible choices. They said David was a father, but fathers protect, fathers lead, fathers fight for their children. David? He was only a man running from debts he could never repay, dragging behind him two daughters who deserved more than hunger, fear, and shame. The cupboards were empty, the chairs were splintered, the small table between them carried nothing but silence. Emily, the younger one, emerald-skinned and far too fragile for this cruel world, sat with wide eyes staring at him. Sarah, older but not much stronger, carried the weight of a mother long buried in the ground. And David. His pockets carried only 2 coins, 2 scraps of metal that mocked him with their worthlessness. His choices narrowed like a noose. Steal and risk prison. Abandon them and live like a coward. Or force Sarah into the factory where the girls before her had fled, hunted by the gaze of a man named Collins. David whispered to himself, "God help me." None of these roads lead to mercy. The city outside was a strange blend of humans and others, emerald-skinned, ash-haired, fragile yet brilliant. For years, alien workers had been paid less, treated as disposable, silenced when they complained. The law favored men like Collins, monsters wrapped in fine suits. Sarah saw her father's trembling hands as he pushed the factory card toward her. "Tomorrow you'll start," he said, his voice cracked. "Father." She hesitated. The others left. They said "Enough," David cut her off, his jaw tightening. "Do you want Emily to starve? Do you want me to watch her die?" Emily's small voice broke the tension. "I'm not hungry," but her hollow cheeks betrayed her. The next day, Sarah stood at the gates of Collins' factory. The building loomed like a grave, swallowing the lives of those who entered. Inside, the air was thick with iron, sweat, and something else. Fear. Mark, a timid worker with kind eyes, gave her a nervous nod. "You're David's daughter?" "Brave. Or foolish," he muttered. Linda, sharp-tongued and smiling too much, whispered in Collins's ear as Sarah walked past. Victor leaned against a wall, counting coins he hadn't earned. And then Collins appeared. His eyes swept over Sarah not like a worker, but like prey. "So," he said, his voice silk and poison together. "Another desperate one. Welcome." Sarah's skin crawled. That night, David waited at home. Emily slept curled up beside the cold stove. David whispered into the darkness, "She's too young for this. I've fed my child to a wolf." But he had no choice, not with debts circling him like vultures, not with mafiosi breathing down his neck. The following days tightened the noose. Sarah worked hard, faster than most, her hands blistered but steady. Yet Collins' gaze followed her everywhere, in the break room, on the factory floor, in his office doorway. Then came the moment. Collins stepped close, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Your father's job. Fragile, isn't it? He's old, disposable. I could crush him tomorrow." Sarah froze. Collins leaned closer. "Unless, of course, you give me reason not to." Her heart pounded. She wanted to spit in his face, to scream. But Emily's hollow cheeks flashed in her mind. When she came home that night, David saw the fear in her eyes. He knew. He didn't need her to speak. Inside his mind, the storm raged. "This man will destroy her." "I can't wait. I can't beg. I must end him before he ends us." That night, David began to weave his plan, a plan that would require him to make a pact with the very devils who hunted him, the Mafia. The first day at the factory was the kind of day that marked a soul forever. Sarah walked through the gates with her father at her side, though it felt less like entering a workplace, and more like stepping into the jaws of a beast. The building stood vast and merciless, windows blackened with smoke, its iron walls echoing the cries of machines that never slept. Inside, the air was hot and bitter, filled with the metallic stench of oil and sweat. The workers moved like shadows, hunched backs, lifeless eyes, hands raw from endless labor. There was no laughter here, no hope, only survival. David's jaw tightened as he glanced at Sarah. His daughter looked so small in this monstrous place. I should be her shield. Instead, I am delivering her to wolves. At her bench, Sarah tried to steady her breathing. A man beside her offered a brief, nervous glance. Mark. His shoulders drooped as though carrying the weight of invisible chains. He whispered without looking at her, "Keep your head down. Don't stand out. That's how you survive." But before she could respond, another presence slithered close. Linda. Her lips curled into a smile that carried no warmth. She circled Sarah like a crow circling carrion. "A new girl," she said softly, though her words cut like glass. "Pretty face. But pretty faces don't last long here." Sarah met her gaze, refusing to flinch. She didn't answer. Silence was her only defense, for now. Then a heavier sound broke through the din. Boots, slow, deliberate, commanding. The factory floor hushed, heads lowered. Even the machines seemed to grind with a quieter rhythm. Mr. Collins had arrived. He was not merely a man, he was a presence. Broad-shouldered, his suit pressed too perfectly for the grime of the factory, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. He moved with the certainty of someone who believed himself untouchable. His gaze found Sarah, and lingered. "Well, David," Collins said, his voice oozing with mockery, "this is your daughter?" "Quite the treasure. Fragile. Delicate." His smile deepened. "Just like your debts." The words cut sharper than any blade. David's fists clenched at his sides. Rage boiled in him, but his debt to the mafia chained every thought. "If I strike him, we all die. If I stay silent, I betray her." Sarah held her ground, though her skin burned under Collins's stare. "He thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'll bend. He's wrong." Collins leaned closer, his tone now a whisper only Sarah and her father could hear. "She'll work here. But remember, David, her future and yours depends on how well she obeys and how much she's willing to sacrifice." He turned, walking away with a smug confidence that filled the silence like smoke. The workers kept their eyes down, afraid to meet Sarah's. From the far end of the hall, another figure watched. A man leaning in the shadows, face partly hidden. John. He observed without moving, his stare calm but unreadable. Unlike the others, he didn't look away when Sarah's eyes met his. Victor appeared next, his hands stained with grease, his pockets always suspiciously full. He clapped David on the shoulder with false cheer. "Tough place, huh? But hey, everything has a price. You pay the right man, you survive." David shook him off. He had no money left to pay anyone. Only 2 coins rattled in his wallet, each one a cruel reminder of his helplessness. Sarah bent over her station, but her thoughts raged louder than the machines. This factory is a prison. Collins is its warden, but I will not let him break me. Not for him, not for anyone. The first sparks of battle had been struck. The wolves had smelled blood, and Sarah, whether she wanted it or not, was now inside the hunt. The first day was barely over when the trap revealed its teeth. Sarah felt it with every step she took on the factory floor. Collins's eyes, heavy, greedy, lingering too long. They crawled across her skin like chains she could not shake. By the time the whistle blew and the workers shuffled out, shoulders bent from exhaustion. Collins's voice cut through the clamor. Stay. It was not a request. It was law. The room emptied, leaving only Sarah, the machine's metallic hum, and the slow rhythm of his boots as he approached. His smile was thin, sharpened like a blade. You've got strength, Collins said, circling her, and spirit. I admire that, but spirit doesn't feed families. It doesn't pay debts. Sarah's jaw tightened. I came here to work. Nothing else? He chuckled, the sound dripping with venom. Work, yes. But let's be honest. His eyes narrowed. Your father, his job hangs by a thread, and I hold the scissors, so here's the choice. His place in this factory, or your pride. The air turned suffocating. Sarah's heart hammered, but she held his gaze. He wants me to break, to bend. He thinks hunger will make me his slave. Her silence was answer enough. Collins leaned closer, his whisper crawling into her ear. Think carefully. Bread on the table, or your dignity. You cannot keep both. That night, she walked home with her father in silence, the weight of his shame pressing harder than the night air. Inside their shack, the cupboard was bare, nothing but dust and echoes. Emily sat by the corner, her small hands trembling as she pulled at her dress. Sarah, she whispered, voice weak, is there bread? I'm so hungry, the words sliced through David's chest. He couldn't look at his youngest daughter, not with those hollow eyes staring back. He clenched his fists, the silence inside him screaming louder than her voice. I am a coward. I let wolves circle my child. I hand her over because I have no strength, but I cannot, will not let this be her fate. His mind spun like a storm. 3 choices clawed at him: run and leave the girls to starve, steal and risk death by the mafia. Let Sarah stay and watch Collins destroy her piece by piece. None were bearable. He looked down at the 2 coins in his pocket, cold and mocking. Worthless metal. But in his mind, a seed of fire began to grow. If I run, they suffer. If I steal, I die. If she stays, Collins wins. Number. There must be another way, a darker road, a plan. I will build it piece by piece, and when it is ready, Collins will choke on his own power. The cupboard was still empty. Emily was still hungry. But David's eyes carried something new that night. Resolve. The kind of resolve that could turn a debtor into a predator. From the moment Sarah stepped back into the factory, she felt the walls closing in. Linda was the first snake to slither near. With her painted smile and darting eyes, she leaned close to Sarah by the machines. You should be careful, Linda whispered, her voice sugar over poison. Collins. He doesn't like when girls refuse him. I'd hate to see you or your father lose everything. Maybe there's a way to keep him happy. Sarah's stomach knotted. She could hear the falseness dripping from every word. Linda wasn't warning her. She was baiting her, waiting for her to stumble. She's not helping me. She's setting the trap wider. Sarah forced a nod but said nothing. Silence was the only weapon she had left. Across the floor, Mark watched. His hands trembled as he stacked crates, sweat dripping from his brow. His eyes flicked toward Sarah, then away again, shame burning his face. Once, when Collins wasn't near, Mark dared to whisper, If you need someone to talk to, His voice cracked, fear choking the words. But the moment Collins's shadow fell across the floor, Mark lowered his head, pretending not to see, pretending not to hear. His fear was stronger than his will. Victor was different. He moved with confidence, his pockets always lined, his eyes sharp and greedy. He had chosen his side long ago. Collins sighed. One evening, David saw Victor speaking quietly with the boss, glancing toward Sarah. Their laughter was low, secretive, cruel. David's blood ran cold. He's selling us. Piece by piece, coin by coin, Victor would trade my daughter's safety for a handful of scraps. The factory itself was the greatest snare of all. Wages were slashed so low they were nothing more than a joke. Workers were forced to buy their food, clothes, even medicine from Collins's own store on credit. And the debts grew like chains. Every payday, the workers walked out with less than they had earned, sinking deeper into the mud. Sarah's first paycheck was nothing but a slip of paper, numbers that mocked her. "You owe," it read. She owed for bread she had never eaten, for supplies she had never bought. Collins's voice was smooth as silk when he explained it to her. "That's how the system works, my dear. You earn, you spend, you owe. And who do you owe? Me. Which means," his smile sharpened, "I own you." Sarah's throat tightened. This isn't just work. This is a cage, and he holds the key. At home, David could see it in her eyes. The silent dread. The hollow exhaustion. She didn't speak of it, but he knew. He felt the same chains tightening around his own neck, and inside him, the plan grew darker. Collins thinks he owns us. He thinks debt makes us slaves, but debt cuts both ways. If I must, I will pay with blood instead of coins. And when the time comes, Collins will pay his own price. The tension thickened, the air itself pressing down like iron. Every step Sarah took, every whisper in the factory, every hungry night at home pulled them closer to the breaking point. And David knew something had to snap. The shadows in the factory always seemed to move differently when John was near. He was quiet, careful, never standing too close, never speaking too much. But his eyes carried weight. Sarah had felt them on her since her first day. One night, after the workers had gone home and only the echo of dripping pipes filled the halls, Sarah found John waiting near the gate. "You shouldn't walk alone here," he said softly. His voice was low, measured, as though every word was chosen with precision. Sarah hesitated. "Why do you care?" For a moment, silence hung between them. Then John's face changed. Less mask, more truth. "I knew your mother." The words struck her like a blow. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. My mother?" John nodded. "Years ago, before the sickness, before Colin's shadow spread over this place, she was kind, strong. She believed in people. And she believed in David, your father. That's why I've been watching. Making sure Collins doesn't destroy the last of what she left behind." Sarah's heart twisted. For years, her mother had been only a memory, a ghost in faded photographs. And now, here was a stranger who carried a piece of her past. But John's eyes flickered, not with sorrow, but with something else, something Sarah couldn't name. "You're helping us?" she asked cautiously. "I am," John said. Then, almost in a whisper, "But I have my reasons. Collins owes me debts older than you. If I bring him down, I settle mine." Sarah froze. "So he's not here just for me. He's here for himself. His kindness has a price." Before she could press further, a harsh voice broke the night. Linda's shrill laugh carried through the gates as she left the office with Collins, their steps echoing across the yard. John melted into the shadows before Sarah could say another word. His presence vanished as though he had never been there. The next morning, rumors spread like wildfire. Collins had called for a grand meeting in the factory yard. Workers were summoned, whispers rising like smoke. David felt the weight in his gut. This isn't a meeting. It's a stage, and Sarah is his target. When Collins finally stepped before the crowd, he wore his mask of charm, a polished suit, his silver pocket watch glinting in the weak light. His voice carried like poisoned honey. "My dear workers," he began, "loyal men and women who keep this factory alive. It has come to my attention that we harbor dishonesty in our ranks. Theft, deception, a betrayal not just of me, but of all of you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted, suspicions rose. And then Collins's hand swept toward Sarah. "This girl," he declared, "this daughter of David, has stolen from the factory's accounts. She has used her position to cheat you all. I have the records to prove it." The workers' murmur turned to a roar. Shock, disbelief, anger. Sarah's face burned with shame. Her voice trembled as she tried to speak. "That's a lie. I've done nothing wrong." But Linda stepped forward with a smirk, holding forged documents. "I saw her myself. She took money. She hid it. She's no better than a thief." Victor nodded in agreement, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Collins is right. She betrayed us." The crowd shifted, the tide turning against her. David's fists clenched, his rage barely contained. "This is it. The trap has sprung. Collins wants her name destroyed, her spirit broken. He wants to make her his prisoner, not with chains, but with shame." Above it all, John watched from the edge of the gathering, his expression unreadable. And in Sarah's chest, one truth rang clear. This was more than accusation. This was war. The crowd had gathered in the dusty yard of the factory, the air thick with tension. Collins stood tall, his polished shoes gleaming, his voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "This girl is a thief," he shouted, pointing at Sarah. "She has stolen from this factory, from you. She is nothing but a liar and a cheat." The workers murmured, torn between disbelief and fear. Sarah's face was pale, her hands trembling, her throat dry. David stood at the edge of the crowd, silent. In his pocket lay only 2 small coins, his last money, the last evidence of his failure as a provider. But what Collins didn't know was that David had already set a darker plan in motion. 2 nights before, David had gone to the back alleys of the city, where shadows walked with knives and debts were carved into flesh. He had begged the mafia, men with cold eyes and colder hands, for help. Not for money, not for mercy, but for vengeance. Now, as Collins raised his hand to present the forged documents, a sound cut through the factory yard, the growl of engines. Heavy black cars rolled in, dust swirling around their tires. The murmurs died. Fear spread like wildfire. From the cars stepped men in dark coats, their movements slow, deliberate. Their presence alone made the workers fall silent. These were not men of the law. They were men of power, the kind that lived above law and beneath mercy. One of them lit a cigarette, the flame bright against the gray air. He exhaled smoke and smiled. "Mr. Collins," he said calmly, his voice dripping with menace, "we've been looking for you." Collins's face drained of color. I don't know who you are." But another man stepped forward, a scar running down his cheek. "Oh, you know us. You've been late with payments. You thought you could play tricks, take more than your share, cheat the wrong people." The workers watched in stunned silence as the mafia surrounded Collins. His mask of confidence shattered, his polished words crumbled into stutters. "This is a mistake," Collins tried to argue, sweat pouring down his face. "You don't understand." But the scarred man grabbed him by the collar. No, you don't understand. You're not the hunter anymore. You're the prey. Gasps filled the yard. Sarah's knees weakened, but David placed a firm hand on her shoulder. His voice was low, steady. Look closely, Sarah, he whispered. This is what men like him fear. Not justice from the courts, justice from the shadows. The mafia dragged Collins forward, his cries echoing against the factory walls. Linda shrank back, her face twisted in terror. Victor stepped aside quickly, his loyalty evaporating in the face of real danger. And John. John only watched, his eyes cold, his lips unreadable. The workers stood frozen. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. The mighty Collins, who had enslaved them with debt and lies, was now nothing more than prey caught in the jaws of predators, far darker than himself. As the mafia pulled him toward the waiting cars, Collins's desperate voice broke the silence. David, you did this. David said nothing. His coins clinked softly in his pocket, the last remains of his poverty, but the first price he had paid for freedom. The factory was silent, but the truth was clear. Everything had changed. The yard was no longer a place of labor. It had become a stage, and on that stage, Collins was dragged into the dirt. His polished suit tore, his face smeared with dust and blood. The mafia did not kill him. Not yet. They wanted fear to sink deeper than any blade. A heavy fist slammed into his ribs. He coughed, spitting red. Another blow split his lip. Every strike cracked his false mask of power. The scarred man bent low, whispering so everyone could hear. Tell them, Collins. Tell them how you forged debts, how you chained workers to your lies. Tell them what you really are. Collins shook his head, trembling, but another punch silenced his defiance. The mafia dragged him upright, forcing him to face the workers. And then David stepped forward. His eyes burned with something more than anger. It was resolve, the kind that cannot be bent or broken. He spoke loudly, his voice ringing across the factory. This man tried to destroy my daughter. He thought power gave him the right to corrupt innocence. But Collins is nothing, nothing but a coward hiding behind papers and fear. Look at him now. His empire was built on lies, and lies always crumble. The workers stirred, whispers rising like a storm. For years, they had bent under Collins's weight, too afraid to resist. Now they saw his true face, not a master, but a parasite. Collins tried to speak, but the scarred man shoved him to his knees. His eyes darted wildly, seeking mercy, finding none. Sarah stood behind her father, trembling, yet unbroken. David turned to her, his voice softer. You're free now, Sarah. He can't touch you. Not ever again. The words carried like fire through the crowd. Linda stepped back, ashamed. Victor lowered his head, exposed as Collins's dog. Even Mark, timid and silent, finally found his voice. He trapped us all in debt, Mark shouted, made us slaves in our own factory. The workers erupted, their anger boiling over years of silence. They shouted Collins's name like a curse, tearing off the chains of fear he had bound them with. The mafia leader raised his hand, and silence fell once more. Collins is finished, he declared. His debts are ours to collect. He belongs to us now. The workers gasped. For them, it was more than revenge. It was liberation. The monster who had ruled their lives had been stripped bare before their eyes. David stepped closer, his voice final and unshakable. Let him rot in the hands of the men he once served. Let the truth of his sins bury him. My family is free, and so are all of you. Sarah closed her eyes. Tears welled, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of release. In that moment, the factory was no longer Collins's prison. It became a place where chains were broken, and in the silence that followed, every worker felt the weight lift from their shoulders. Sarah was free. David had won. And Collins, once untouchable, was nothing more than a broken man on his knees. The Mafia did not end Collins' life. Death would have been too merciful. Instead, they stripped him of what he valued most: power. On his knees, beaten and trembling, Collins begged for his position, his wealth, his influence. But the scarred man leaned down and hissed in his ear, "You are nothing now. The game is over. You don't rule men anymore. You crawl beneath them." They dragged him out of the factory, broken, humiliated, alive, but powerless. His empire crumbled in the dust behind him. For the first time in years, the workers looked at each other not as prisoners, but as free men and women. The chains of debt had been shattered, their tormentor cast down. Mark raised his voice, timid no longer. "We don't need masters. We'll build this place together. For ourselves." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, turning into a roar of unity. They would rebuild not as slaves, but as equals. David stood among them, shoulders heavy, but heart lighter than it had been in years. He looked at Sarah, her eyes no longer dimmed by fear. He looked at Emily, frail but alive, clinging to her sister's hand. For the first time, he allowed himself a smile. His inner voice whispered, steady and certain, "I failed them once. But not now, not ever again." Sarah stepped closer to her father, her voice trembling, yet strong. "We're free, Papa. Truly free." And on the dusty table nearby, 2 worn coins glimmered in the sunlight. Worthless to most, priceless to them, because those 2 coins had carried a family through darkness into dawn. David placed his hand over the coins. "These are not money. These are memory, the cost of survival, the weight of love." Silence fell across the yard, broken only by the sound of hope. Workers talking, planning, dreaming of a future they had once thought impossible. The factory had been a prison. Now it was theirs. And Collins, the man who had ruled with fear, was gone, cast out of the game forever. If this story shook you, if it made you feel the weight of chains and the fire of freedom, then don't leave it silent. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let your voice be heard. Because stories like this are not just told, they are carried, remembered, and reborn in those who listen.